My mother abused me my whole life and is now suing me to see my children. I'm fed up. I am a 41-year-old, happily married father of 5 children. My wife and I have been married for 20 years and both of us came from fractured, chaotic families. My wife's parents divorced and were both alcoholics. Her father died of liver failure and her mother has cooled off a bit and has retired. My parents went through a vicious, violent divorce when I was a child. My father moved 10 states away to get away from the craziness, and my mother has never changed. Because of our experiences with violent and unstable families, my wife and I have worked extremely hard to be picture-perfect parents and spouses. We've done everything you can think to have a perfect life for our kids. My wife is a sports coach, and I'm a scoutmaster with the BSA. Our kids are healthy, engaged, and have everything they need physically and emotionally. This has been in spite of our families, not because of them. My mother is a terrible woman. She systematically abused me throughout my whole childhood and continued to be a violent, bitter, mean, and aggressive person to me throughout my whole life. I could sit here for hours and write about the things that she's done. She used the courts to destroy the life of my father for decades. Once he was out of the house, she turned her anger at me with physical and emotional violence. When I was 16, she expelled me from the house and left me homeless. I had to go from house to house, figuring out where to live, and try to graduate high school. I ended up living with an older boy that was about 4 years older than me, and I had to engage in a sexual relationship with him in order to secure that housing. I was not gay, I did not want to be gay, and I had to endure something that destroyed me in order to not be sleeping on the street. When I turned 18, I was able to start working at a better job, and was able to get out of that bad situation and start my life from scratch. My wife and I have scratched and clawed our way into a stable, middle-class lifestyle. We both went to college at night for years and years, and we have good jobs and a house in the suburbs. Out of a sense of duty to our family, I sought to include my extended family in our lives, and permitted a relationship with strict boundaries between my mother and my children. For the most part, she has been fairly stable for about 20 years. I say stable in that we could have routine contact about once per month for that time period, with a minimum of disruptive behavior. She has never acknowledged her abuse to me as she is an extremely selfish person. Everything about our past has been left unsaid. My mother, over the last 2 years, has become completely unraveled. Her second husband decided to leave her for his own health and sanity, and she has instantly reverted back to the most cruel and the most bizarre behavior imaginable. All aspects of her life have been affected. She is calling the cops, suing him in family court, alienating large parts of her family from one another, all while trying to tell my children about why their grandfather is a crap for how she feels about him. Once I saw this happening, I said, "That's it, not again," and took some action. At the beginning of this year, I wrote a very courteous note to my mother asking her to re-evaluate the way she's been behaving to me and my family. When I tell you it was neutral and courteous, I really mean it. I checked it like 5 times. She responded by calling me terrible names, ungrateful piece of crap, for example, and screaming bloody murder on the phone at me. I blocked her from my phone. Then she did the same thing to my wife, so I informed my mother by email that I'd like to maintain distance until she works on herself in therapy or with her divorce mediator. Things lay still for about 6 months. This morning, I wake up to a series of bizarre emails from my mother asserting that she wants to see my children for their birthday, which is coming soon, and that she is giving me 24 hours to provide acceptable dates for permitting visitation, or to be prepared for a legal summons to family court. I'm like, what the F? This woman is the equivalent of a schoolyard bully, following me around in life, tormenting me non-stop until you just want to cry. The worst part of a bully is that when you ask them to lay off you for even 5 minutes, that they just take this as a cue to keep it up even more. I took one look at this and I was like, holy crap, this woman is clearly out of her mind. Now I know in the post title I said she's suing me. I work in the legal field, and I know that until I've been summoned to appear, that I have not been sued. So, no, she's only threatening to sue me right now. Sorry for using the hyperbole. But I'm finding myself in the same bizarre, out-of-touch reality that everyone in this person's life finds themselves. This crap insane woman forced me to see my own father at a McDonald's when we were kids for 2 hours every 2 weeks as per the court order while she waited outside in a running car. I was only allowed to see him in this fashion because she hated him and didn't care what this would do to her own kids. There were more than a few times when the clock would strike 8 and she would come screaming into the McDonald's threatening to call the cops and have my dad arrested for kidnapping while grabbing us by the arms and pulling us out of the store. This is what she's capable of doing with family court. I had a literal, hyperventilating panic attack on the floor of my office this morning. I have sought to be respectful, mature, and use good decision-making this whole time. My wife and I have an extremely secure marriage, and she is in agreement with me 100% through all of this. I'm finding myself wishing that my mother would just die already, and just please to leave me alone. She's like this inescapable bully that will never, never under any circumstance leave a person alone until she's proven that she can hurt them. I don't even care what she's experienced in her life. I just need to be away from her. So that's my true off-my-chest story. I've been living with this shame and fear and lingering self-hatred for 30+ years, all while trying to be super dad and a great career man. I called a local family law practice today to get a referral. I'm going to ask them to send a demand letter to her to try and get her to back the hell off. But look at what this has come to. I have to shell money out of my own pocket to protect myself and my kids from my insane mother. I feel like Rodney Dangerfield sometimes. Ironically, the money I'm going to have to send to the lawyer for their retainer is money that I had earmarked for the kids to go to summer camp. So figure that one out. Thank you for letting me tell you my story. Just typing it out helps. Update. I posted this all on Thursday when I was experiencing a serious amount of turmoil. Since then, I've calmed down a lot and also had the good judgment to talk this over with the important people in my life. First things first, I'd like to thank everyone for the words of encouragement and support that were given. There were some surprising insights from many of the posters, and I found myself agreeing with and appreciating many of the stories of support that were posted by others. I now understand that I am not the only person with a domineering, selfish, easily enraged parent. To all the people who blamed me for being a victim of my mother, and somehow being at fault for all this, well, I want to use some strong language to you, but I'll just ask you to please think about how fortunate your life has been that you haven't experienced what I have experienced. So on to the update. As it turns out, only 2 states in the Union have codified grandparents' rights, California and New York, and I do live in New York. Basically, in New York, a grandparent does not have the automatic right to have access to grandchildren. But a grandparent does have automatic standing to file a petition to be heard in family court. The petition can be squashed, but they can file the petition. I do want to get back to this later. I did conference with a family law attorney on Friday, and he helped me to understand the situation and craft a strategy. He was generous enough to not require a retainer unless and until I'm served with legal papers. He basically explained that the grandparent does have standing to file a petition based on a pre-existing relationship with the grandchildren, but that she would most likely not be able to overcome the desires of 2 married parents who are both exercising their judgment for the health and safety of their children. He explained that in NY, our simple desire to terminate a relationship would most likely be overcome in court. However, if we introduce some of the specific actions that she's exhibited over the last few years, familial alienation, adult humor near children, uncontrollable anger, hoarding of house cats, dangerous operation of a motor vehicle, that we would very likely prevail in a court setting. He explained that the good thing is that we had already restricted contact between our children and my mother to about once per month, and that in his experience he had never seen a court order for grandparent visitation for more often than once a month, for 1 hour per session. I try to be reasonable, so I said, okay, the worst case scenario is supervised status quo. I did broach the topic of a restraining order, and I was quickly schooled on how that works. Despite the Reddit attorneys who all assured me that I can automatically get a restraining order, well, I hate to say that you're all completely wrong. An order of protection has to be accompanied by some facilitating act of domestic violence. Because I've only been harassed and alarmed by words, I can't be granted a restraining order, period. However, if my mother causes some disorderly act such as coming to my house and causing a ruckus, that could trigger an order if and only if I document it by having the police come and detailing a report. So, keep that in mind next time you recommend a restraining order. They're not easy to get. The attorney recommended that I send a private cease and desist to my mother via certified mail and email. I decided to write a 2-page, brutal takedown of this woman in order to blow off some steam and document in writing my concerns and try to get ahead of her legal maneuvering. I decided to take a 2-pronged approach. First, I send this cease and desist to her on Friday at lunchtime via email and also certified mail. Then, I took a page out of her playbook and publicly scorched the earth to apply social pressure to her. I emailed and texted every single member of my extended family, brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, my stepfather, my father, and spoke to several of them to tell them exactly what was happening. Whether they wanted to hear it or not, I sent them intimate details of my mother's abuse and my decision to cut her off for the welfare of myself and my family. My reasoning there is simple. My mother's abuse thrives in closed doors and embarrassed silence. For 30 years I've had to hear, "Oh, you know, that's just the way your mother is," while people just stood by and let her act in the most insane and violent ways you can imagine. My mother got angry at my stepfather last year and tried to run him over with her car, then crashed her car into the front door of his business, screaming at him and ranting and raving in public. Do you know what people did? They surely called the police or an ambulance and had her monitored for her safety, right? No, my sister quickly threw her into her car and drove her away so that she wouldn't be arrested. My stepfather was so embarrassed that he took the crashed car, drove it to a parking spot, and then paid out of pocket for the damage to the front of his business. This is what happens in families that are dealing with a crazy person. They cover it up, hoping that it will someday get better. Well, I'm not comfortable with this anymore. I sought to publicly embarrass and pressure her for a change. Anyway, by Friday afternoon, my mother got the message and sent me emails telling me that I can stop attacking her and maligning her to my family. She indicated that she would abandon any legal efforts to seek visitation with my children. This was a relief, but to be fair, I was almost looking forward to having a public forum to describe her antics at court. Nevertheless, it seems like she's backing off for the moment. The fallout and damage to my extended family is most likely severe and permanent. However, my wife and I discussed this fully and have decided that this is the direction we're going in. We'll just have to have holidays by ourselves if the family can't be loyal and supportive to me. On to the last point, and I really want to drive this home. In 1991, my mother conducted an incredibly vicious divorce against my father. She literally sought to destroy him. And she did. He was completely beaten by her. One of the things that my father told me about just this weekend was that at the time my grandparents on his side sought to have guaranteed visitation with us after the divorce. My mother actually went to court on that specific topic and specifically litigated that she was the custodial mother and had sole decision-making about who the children would be around. The court ruled at the time that in fact, there was no right for a grandparent to see children, and my mother successfully was able to keep me away from my very loving and happy grandparents for years. I was only able to see them during court-mandated visitation with my own father. The law in New York changed in 2000 so that grandparents' rights came into effect. Too late to help me, unfortunately. I want to really drive this home. The ball's on this woman to go to court on her own behalf and state in a court of law that she, as the custodial mother of children, has the sole and ultimate decision on who her children have relationships with, and then to 35 years later attempt to use the changes in law to assert that she has grandparents' rights to visitation despite the wishes of the both parents was too much for me to bear. That alone made me say, no way, not happening under my watch. So that's the update. Long-winded, yes, but it makes me feel good to type this out. I'm finally able to unburden the unbearable shame and embarrassment of what happened to me to members of my family, and I won't allow myself to be ignored anymore. I'm 41 and my selfish, insane baby boomer butthole mother is in her mid-70s and has no power over me anymore. I'm sick and tired of bottling this up. Anyone who doesn't like it, they can go suck an egg. I deserve to have loyal and faithful people in my life. Next story. Am I the butthole for feeling like my eldest daughter should be treated the same as my real children? When Min 45 daughter 13 was born, I immediately felt that something was obviously amiss. She was blonde-haired and blue-eyed, which was extremely unlikely for a child of myself and my ex-wife F39. I am very Mediterranean, and I have olive skin, dark eyes, and dark hair. My ex-wife has brown eyes and relatively dark brown hair. Her skin is barely lighter than mine. The baby also clearly bore no resemblance to me or anyone in my family at all. I had been having misgivings about my ex too, and she seemed too quick to express surprise and make excuses. Still though, I didn't want to throw away my marriage over what could have been my own misunderstanding of genetics, and so I signed the birth certificate. I instantly knew that I was going to have a paternity test done, but something else surprised me. When I brought our little girl home, I still fell in love with her. It felt just like bringing my son M14 home, and looking at her, I still just saw her as an innocent, beautiful little baby. We bonded. The paternity test came back negative, as I suspected it would, and I decided that our marriage was over. I still loved our little girl though. My then wife did everything that she could to drag out the divorce and refused to separate or move out. My daughter's biological father, every bit as blonde and blue-eyed as I suspected, turned out to want nothing to do with her or my ex. He was already married with his own family, and his only focus was preventing the situation from blowing back on himself too much. My ex went totally nuts when both I and her affair partner rejected her, and she made some very unfortunate decisions. To make a long story short, she ended up with prison time for crimes including identity theft, assault with a deadly weapon, and grand theft auto when she stole credit cards and forged documents for both of us, and when she stole her affair partner's car and tried to run him over with it. I ended up with custody of our kids, with the affair partner never even attempting to establish any kind of paternity rights. I didn't want to press the issue myself, as I couldn't deny that I had bonded with this child, even knowing that she wasn't my real daughter. I had been shunning my ex-wife as best I could and trying to move on with life after she was finally out of the house. It wasn't long before I got together with and married my current wife F34, and we've since had another 2 children, M10, F8. My eldest daughter is a total daddy's girl, and we have a wonderful relationship. She always feels loved, and I treat her the same as my other kids. Even though she obviously stands out, my family accepts her too, or at least that's what I thought. I work for my father's company, and the other day we were out talking about the future and his will, and he was talking about what money, assets, etc. he wanted to leave to whom, including his grandchildren, and I noticed that my older daughter had been left out. I mentioned it to him, and he said, "It's nice what you've done for daughter's name, but you have real children, and obviously they should come first." I interrupted him, and I told him that she is my real daughter, and that I thought she should be treated equally. He just paused and looked at me for a moment, and he said, "I guess you feel how you feel," before he noticed I was still about to argue with him, and he shrugged and moved the conversation on to things about work and my siblings. I was too polite to try to force the matter at the time, but it sort of stuck with me. My father isn't the type of man to harp on a point, and I am certain that he's content to have said his piece and would let the matter drop. He could certainly tell that what he said upset me, and so I doubt he'd bring it up again. Frankly, he sort of raised me the same way. At the time, I was shocked, because he's always seemed to accept my daughter as a part of the family. He buys her gifts for her birthday and for Christmas, and he makes her feel welcome. But, thinking about it, he really is just a kind, polite, and generous man in a lot of ways. He will and has bought Christmas gifts for high school friends or significant others, if he knew they were coming, and the same for other gift-giving occasions. He's generally very hospitable to anyone his friends or family bring around, so I thought that maybe it was just that, and I misinterpreted. My wife is Asian, and so my eldest daughter always stands out. She's thin and blonde and blue-eyed, unlike pretty much anyone else in my family, and she's taller than any of the other girls or even most of the women, really, so I'm aware that she might look like the neighbor kid visiting or something. My wife loves her, and I know that she 100% accepts her as one of our kids, and she has been a great stepmom. I talk to my own mother, though, and while she's definitely closer to my daughter than my father, they interact a lot more, and she includes my daughter with the other kids, other girls in family traditions and activities. I got a little bit of the same vibe from her. She was much more diplomatic, but it seems like she may also sort of consider my daughter to be sort of a guest unfortunate orphan I'm hosting or something like that. She pointed out that I can make my own will however I want. My daughter knows that she isn't biologically mine. That would have been hard to hide, even if we'd really had the opportunity. She doesn't want anything to do with either of her bio parents, though. She's seen her bio dad perhaps a handful of times in her entire life, and I don't even think he can remember her middle name. He seems to have pretty successfully kept his family together and his wife from leaving him, but he definitely doesn't want any involvement. My ex-wife continued to spiral for a long while, and she lives in another state with another man and her own new family at this point. She mercifully rarely makes contact. I've never really tried to go after either of them for money. I don't need it, and it's not a pot I want to stir. My siblings are mostly supportive, if a little bit mixed on the issue. Some of them say that they could never raise the child of a partner's affair, but all of them say that they love and accept their niece. I just can't get over the way that I feel distant and upset about what my father said, though. He's an extremely kind and generous man, and he's always taken care of his family. He's given me opportunities and a lifestyle that I could never have achieved without him. I love him and I look up to him. Maybe that's why I feel sort of, I don't know, betrayed. It feels wrong that she's the only one of his grandchildren to be left out of his will, apparently because he doesn't consider her a real grandchild. Intellectually, I can accept that he's technically correct, but it feels wrong. She is my daughter. Am I wrong, though? Am I just being entitled and unreasonable here? Am I the butthole? Update. Just a small update. Thanks for the comments and wishes. It really put a lot of things into perspective, and it confirmed to me that I needed to say something. Some people seemed surprised at the way I let my daughter's bio parents off the hook, so to speak. The main reason I've never tried to go after my ex or her affair partner for child support is that my daughter is more important than money. I'm not struggling at all, and I have the support I need. More importantly, though, I have my daughter, even though the affair partner didn't apparently want anything to do with her. My lawyer did mention way back in the day that either he or my wife, being her biological parents, could have a strong case for seeking custody. I know I'm biased, but her bio dad seems like a huge butthole, and I know he doesn't care about her. I wouldn't put it past him to try to get custody just to duck out of paying child support, though, if his hand was forced. And the idea of her having to go stay with him is just something I don't even want to think about. Kind of the same thing when her mom got out of prison. She seemed like she was very quick to go shack up with her new guy, and she seemed willing to let the matter lie, so I did the same. The fact that neither of them tried to get her, or, in my ex's case, the way she hasn't even bothered to keep much contact with our son, either tells me more than everything I need to know about the kind of parents they are would be. They only seem interested in their pre-existing new families, respectively. I wouldn't want to try to back them into trying to take custody. With my daughter being 13, it's possible that we've sort of run out the clock on that matter, but it's still not drama we need or a risk worth taking. In better and more important news though, I talked with my dad. I met with my father for lunch, which was easy enough as he's around most days and we could sync up sometime. I mentioned that I wanted to talk about my daughter not being in his will, and I told him that even if it meant dividing what was being left to me or my other kids, I felt it was really important for her to be included. I also mentioned, as I felt, and as a lot of people pointed out, that it would be devastating for her to find out that she'd been excluded after his death. My father agreed that that was a really good point, and he said that she is a lovely girl, that he does love her, and that he wouldn't want to add extra pain or bitterness to her life, especially at such a time. Also, it had gotten around to him that I'd been sort of polling my siblings a little bit, and I think my mom talked to him some, and he said, "This is obviously very important to you. You're my son, I can just change it. It's not so much money anyway." And he was right. The amounts of money being left to individual grandchildren aren't massive, but the gesture and the thought are what's most meaningful. Mostly everything is going to my mom and or us, his kids anyway. Really, there was no reason for me to expect him to have been stubborn or hard-hearted about any of this. It was just something that we needed to talk about. My father reiterated that everyone loves my daughter and that she'll always be family and always have a home. He has a gold bracelet that he has worn somewhat occasionally over the years, and he mentioned that my daughter thought it was pretty. When she was very little, she noticed it on his wrist and said that jewelry was for girls. He laughed and explained to her that sometimes boys wear jewelry too. She thought it was nice, and he let her try it on even though it was way too big for her wrist. She was a little toddler then. I didn't know about that moment between them, and I thought it was really sweet that he remembered. He said that he was going to leave her the bracelet and a note, and that as far as money goes, she'd get the same share as the rest of my kids. So we had a nice lunch, and we both felt better for it. Nothing too dramatic, but really the best way things could have gone. Thanks everyone for confirming that I wasn't being crazy and confirming that I needed to talk to my father and set things right. I hope you guys like this video. If you did, make sure like, comment, share, and subscribe the channel James Stories.